Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Monthly Blend, a monthly video podcast brought to you by Next, powered by Chameleon Rogers and Connectpreneur. I'm Tien, Wong, founder and host of the Connectpreneur community, which is a global community of over 30,000 investors, founders, and business leaders around the world. I'm also CEO of Opus 8, and we help companies and fund managers raise money through our network of almost 4,000 accredited private investors, angels, and family offices throughout the U.S. Along with my co-host, Anthony Millin, who's the founder and chair of Next, powered by Chameleon Rogers, we are pleased to bring you this monthly video podcast, which covers trends, information, and interesting research and tidbits, as well as fascinating interviews with game changers and newsmakers here in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore Metroplex. Anthony and I started this podcast around 2 years ago as a way to increase awareness of cool, innovative happenings in our region, to break down silos and serve as a mechanism to do our part in helping to bring the region together and help foster innovation and entrepreneurship here. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have a conversation about SBIR's Small Business Innovation Research programs. SBIR funding has had a significant impact on the startup and early stage community here in the Baltimore, D.C. region, and we are joined by two of the nation's leading experts in SBIRs. We have Dr. Diane Hickey with Chameleon Group and Inspiralia USA. And we also have Dr. Christopher Steele with the new U.S. Navy Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. I'd love to have our guests self-introduce. So if we could start with Diane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and welcome.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I'm relatively new to the DC metro area. I've been here a year and a half. Prior to that, I was in the Florida, Tampa, I-4, Orlando corridor, Space Coast. And then prior to that, I was in the Chicago region. So I've been in several innovation areas with growing communities. And when I came to the DC area, and especially Startup Week, so thank you for supporting that, Startup Week DC is a must-attend event. I was so blown away with how active and innovative this whole area is in, again, bringing together people. So thank you for having me on the podcast. My background is I have a PhD in material science and engineering, but I've also started my career at Accenture. After my PhD, I ended up starting to work for a spin out of Argonne National Lab in the Chicago region. And it was when I joined, there were 6 people, and it was solely funded by SBIRs and STTRs from various departments. And in 5 years, we grew to about 25 people. As director of sales and marketing, I moved us from all grant funding to half grant and half revenue, and helped secure our third round of funding and our major round before I left. But then the company exited in 2019, so sold. And after that, I ended up starting my own company called Chameleon Group. We work on hard technologies for commercialization partners for, again, bringing together the ecosystem. The past 2 years, though, I was on sabbatical from my own company, working with the National Science Foundation as an SBIR program director, where I started our metaverse or AR/VR technology topic, also the human-computer interaction topic area, and relaunched our EdTech as the learning and cognitive technology topic area. During that time, I funded about 50 companies, and have since, after leaving the National Science Foundation, working with a number of other companies, startups, and a group called Inspiralia, who is part of the support ecosystem for assisting companies that navigate through the sometimes complex world of SBIRs. If you're not in the DoD, I think they're called SBIRs. Is that correct, Christopher?
We like to shorten anything we can. So yeah.
So I'll pass it off to you then.
So hi, I'm Chris Steele. I'm a PhD chronobiology, circadian rhythm researcher by training. I don't know if I can follow Diane, but I think I have to. So I'll tell you a bit about my recent career. And then today, I'm not really necessarily representing Navy. I'm representing my views on kind of what I've been doing and what I've seen with how SBIRs can be great successes, and also how to make sure that as a company, you might think about them in the right way from your utility and your livelihood. But so for me, a PhD from NC State in circadian rhythm research, prior Army back in the 1900s. But after that, with my PhD, came to the Navy to do some applied research on really jet lag, shift work, sleep optimization. And then really for the past 10 years, I've been an investor inside the Department of Defense, Office of Naval Research for the Navy, and also U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command at Fort Detrick. So running Army and joint programs, joint meaning for all the services for medical investments. So again, having been investing about $1 billion over a decade and planning for about that much in the future, the way we look at and utilize SBIRs or SBIRs from our perspective and how we actually build teams on the outside is a really interesting opportunity for us. And so those SBIRs, STTRs do allow for ways that teams can be built. And as we start investing in them, we can understand how we can, build a better product than just an isolated initiative. So I think we've seen a lot of things. I've certainly run a number of programs that have relied on SBIRs and really putting them in the fleet, so to speak, in the field so that we can use them is again, a number of success stories there. And I think those programs are really great for small companies to try to understand, get their foot in the door on how the DoD works. And then looking across SBIRs, there's ability to share them across U.S. government organizations. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. So
great. Thank you so much, guys. And now I'd like to turn things over to my co-host, Anthony Millin, who is a serial entrepreneur, a VC, and one of the nation's leading startup attorneys. Anthony is founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. Next is disrupting the way legal services are being delivered via unique fixed price structure, which allows for expert legal advice on a cost-effective basis for early stage companies. And in the last 2 years, this novel model has received accolades and awards from such prestigious institutions as Legal Week and Legal Times. Anthony, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Tien and Diane and Chris. It's great to have you with us today. SBIRs are a really valuable capital raising component for startup and emerging growth companies. And maybe a good place to start is to just lay some foundation for viewers today. And so if you could provide a brief overview of what SBIRs are and how you see they function within government funding landscape, just to give people some perspective on that. And maybe Diane, will start with you.
Yeah, so I tell a story when I'm giving presentations about kind of the way that SBIRs came about. And we've all heard those stories on the news about a researcher somewhere discovered this amazing thing that could one day lead to this other thing. And in the 70s, Congress kept hearing this. And they're like, when does one day happen? We hear about all this funding that we're doing, and it could one day lead to, and we don't see it. So the SBIR program actually addressed something that was commonly called the chasm, right? Why am I blanking on that term? When you're trying to get
death.
The Valley of Death, thank you. When you're trying to cross the chasm of the Valley of Death to get from an innovation from the lab to the market. So the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and its partner program, the Tech Transfer, STTR, Small Business Tech Transfer Program, which we dropped the B out, is its baby brother, kind of very small amount. So we just kind of generalized into SBIRs. Created this program, and it has since grown. It is now the largest seed fund in the nation, and it's overarchingly run by the Small Business Association. And I'll pass it to Christopher to kind of talk about its role in how it advances everything through our nation, really.
Yeah, so I don't work in the small business shops in the DoD, which I think is helpful for this team because it's more about how it's perceived inside the buildings that we own, and also from a user perspective. So I think you could have the same podcast later and get the people to run those programs. But the important thing is often the content that's requested isn't the small business organization that conducts it. It's usually the program managers in the Department of Defense or in the NIH that's trying to push improvements in the content area. So the government is a complicated organization. If you're not in it, it may be complicated to understand. And if you're in it, it's also complicated to understand. So the small business opportunities do allow us to kind of do a little bit more closer way to talk about what we're needing, what we're looking for. It allows smaller amounts of starting for a phase one for teams to kind of be down selected, and then the phase twos moving forward closer to the product development stage of it. But I think in 2020, I think there was about $3.5 billion in the federal government for small business initiatives. So it's not a small amount. And then I think for us, running programs from my perspective in the DoD on psychological health and sleep optimization and traumatic brain injury and many, many topics, there's always opportunities to make sure we harden and commercialize the things that are bright ideas. And so, as Diane mentioned, when do these things become procurable or purchasable? And frankly, when do we get them to be hardened in actually a product form? And I think this is where small business can start in the DoD, and then they can build partnerships before, during, and after. And it's really a pretty agile construct for us to be able to kind of grab something pretty quickly. And then, I think Diane mentioned grants or contracts that are early on that can transition to something that's, more consistently sellable for us or purchasable for us. And this is the mechanism that allows you to do that, because it becomes a sole source opportunity once we have a group on board through the phase twos. So really, it allows for a long-term livelihood partnership in the government with small business initiatives.
So, Chris, you mentioned phase two. Can you explain just briefly to people kind of what it means in terms of phase one and phase two, like how that fits in? People have heard the mention of phases, but how that works.
There's typically an initial call for proposals, like most government organizations do. And then, if you're lucky enough to win the first phase, there's usually like a 9-month performance opportunity where the teams demonstrate that they can do what they said they're going to do. And then the phase two really starts being a little bit higher amount of funding, and then also a little bit more interest in the government on, okay, we're starting to build things now, and what does this look like? So, but it's the phase twos that are active or completed where that's actually the real nice thing for you. So a little known understanding is that if you have a phase two that you previously worked on, organizations that do SBIRs within the government, for example, NIH versus the Department of Defense, sometimes those can be brought over, and we can say, well, listen, the NIH asked you to do a product for, preventing hearing loss, and we like that problem as well because we need to solve it. So sometimes we can bring over an additional phase two within our organizations, and what it allows for you to do is work with more funds on a similar topic than with the original proposal, but the phase two itself allows it to be brought over. And so the reason that's important for you is that sometimes the phase twos and phase ones, there may be a reason why that organization doesn't have a follow-on step, or maybe in the Department of Defense specifically, maybe it was a priority last year that 2 years later is less of a priority. So what we don't want is the signals to communities or businesses that there's no way ahead. So what we like to do is look for things that are already demonstrated. Think in the FDA terms, you've shown safety. Now let's get to efficacy for our own organizations. And so moving those things around is something that's an opportunity, and it's fast. And also you have a team that's been built. So the phase twos really are where you're getting a little bit closer to kind of hardening and making something that we can, kind of grab and use in the field. So hopefully that helps. Diane, anything better to say than what I said?
No, I think you've got it. There's a lot more that you can go deeper, but I think that's going to be part of Anthony and Tien's questions as we go forward.
Great. So then, Diane, in terms of speaking to entrepreneurs, what are some of the benefits an entrepreneur can gain by participating in SBIR programs? What should they be thinking about in terms of the value of those programs to new companies that are being built?
Well, the most exciting part of the SBIR program are the words non-dilutive funding. For those of you who are not familiar with all the terms in the VC world or venture or startup, non-dilutive funding means that these grants or contracts, the government does not take any equity. The IP that you create through this is your own, the company's. And that is very attractive for two reasons. One, you still own your company. But more attractively, especially phase one, typically, and I'm just going to put some numbers on this, is around somewhere in the 250, 300K amount for about 6 months to a year for a proof of concept. Now, if you are a top-notch researcher in the scientific field, more than likely that amount of money to pay you and somebody else and get some equipment and do research is not going to be a full-time thing. It sounds like a lot of money, but it will go very quickly, especially with overhead and things like that. But phase two, which is what Christopher was referring to, is where you get into the 1 million, 1.2 million, sometimes $500,000, but that's where you get into some significant opportunity because you've proven the technical feasibility. You are now working on creating a more elaborate prototype or something that could be tested by the DoD. And also, this is where you get into a whole lot of interest from venture capital or angel investors because you've just received about $2 million in non-dilutive funding. The government, some aspect of the government, has validated that not only do you have an effective technology, but that you also have an effective go-to-market strategy through your commercialization plan, which is normally part of any phase 2. You must still be a small business, a profitable, hopefully long-term sustainable small business. So if you're developing something for the warfighter, you'll be able to continue to develop it for the warfighter for a period of time. So that's why small businesses or startups are really excited about an SBIR because it gets that attraction. VCs should be looking because there's already a $2 million investment that has no equity. And for the companies, especially with the DoD, there's an opportunity to have a sole source customer in the government, which is huge. And typically, a lot of these technologies are dual use.
I think you hit on one of the most important things, which is this concept of non-dilutive funding and that first capital in that helps you get to at least some minimum viable product, something that's quantifiable that takes you from just an idea to something you can show investors. And when you were both talking about the valley of death and kind of getting through to de-risking the business to its next level, this becomes a really valuable way to do it that not all entrepreneurs are aware of. That is an option out there to just going out and trying to get that initial seed funding or pre-seed funding. Chris, in terms of the DoD, we've talked a little bit about the DoD. How does the DoD specifically support healthcare innovation through SBIRs? And what are the kinds of opportunities does it offer entrepreneurs, specifically in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, I think it probably offers almost too many opportunities. So we own our own personnel. We own our own medical providers. We own our own operational downrange problems. And we own our own healthcare in the United States. And so there are opportunities in medical treatment facilities for product improvement. And then there are also opportunities for products that get used downrange in or at sea. So with that, frankly, each service, the Navy, the Army, Air Force, et cetera, and Special Operations Command have their own opportunities to do healthcare-focused SBIRs. The Defense Health Agency is a new kind of joint organization to oversee all of the healthcare, certainly in garrison and hospital settings. So you could see a call in a particular year from the Army or the Navy that overlaps with the Defense Health Agency for the right reasons and sometimes for maybe deconflictive reasons. So the long answer is anything associated with preventive medicine, patient monitoring, rapid rehabilitation and return to duty, long-term treatments. You could see anything there in a content area for healthcare. And then also in what we do, a lot of things, occupational medicine. Simple example would be the health of an aviator or a pilot over time. So tracking and monitoring, maybe improving neck and back pain, which is very common there. So that might not be a healthcare device that goes in a hospital, but certainly opportunities to improve and understand the operational impacts on medical overtime and readiness in our terms is important. So with that, and a lot of opportunities, really, frankly. And in the Department of Defense, we do SBIRs as contracts. So in that case, we're a little bit more prescriptive about what we're asking for. Other government organizations do them as grants. And I think that the right answer is, what does the call for proposals look like? What are we asking for? And in most cases, I think the investment strategy from an outsider shouldn't really change, but it just may make a slight difference in terms of how you talk about it. And we're doing SBIRs with the intent of pulling it forward later and hopefully being able to procure it. So for us, the contract initiation is kind of the right step for us. Hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. And I think on the contract side, it's very similar to having customer-based financing through contracts in that sector as well. So that's non-dilutive. Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
No, I was going to add a couple of items. One being that the DoD's innovation, especially in healthcare, is really cutting edge. I've been at the International VR Healthcare Association conference earlier this year, and the VA has the leading expert in using VR for rehabilitation and things like that. So it's really cutting edge, and they try a lot of new technologies. They actually have, I think, even labs specifically for trying out new technologies. Mm-hmm. And there has been a recent change, and this is good for all of listeners who have kind of looked at the SBIR program maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but haven't seen it recently. There's been one recent change that the Air Force started, and it's really, I think, taken on. Typically, you'd have to look at all of the broad agency announcements, BAA, to see what topics people are looking for, which is time-consuming. It's frustrating. You got to know where to go. You got to know when the deadlines are. But AFWorks, which is the Air Force's kind of SBIR program, they opened it up to any technology that someone feels would be valuable to the DoD. And you come in, and your phase one specifically is simply to find a government customer, which is an amazing program, and it's really gotten a lot of traction.
So we've talked about kind of what SBIR is, and you both have done a great job in terms of explaining its value and its benefits to startups, both in healthcare and more broadly. And at this point, if I'm an entrepreneur watching this, I'm getting really excited about this potential type of capital that might be accessible. So that leads to the question of, what are the main eligibility criteria and requirements for entrepreneurs applying for funding? And are there common pitfalls or challenges that applicants should be aware of if they get really excited listening to today's program and decide this is something they want to explore?
I'll take the first part of that. To be eligible for this, a company has to be a small business, so less than 500 people, and the small business as defined by the Small Business Administration. Less than 500 people. You must be owned by U.S. citizens. It cannot be foreign owned. And I believe this is true across the board. You cannot be majority owned by a VC or other group. Those are the main principal requirements. Typically, also, it can't just be a good idea or a need. It has to be and this is especially true for like National Science Foundation or Department of Energy, it has to be an innovation technology. Again, trying to remember things coming from the lab to new innovations and something that really can change the world, bringing it out to the public.
Really
great. Thank you. Chris, you've deployed, you said, about being involved or connected to about $1 billion of capital. So you've seen a lot of companies go through this process. What are some of the most common pitfalls and challenges if you were guiding founders looking at this today from that experience?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is, again, the way we work, which is, again, it's about half the SBIR monies are DoD used. It's going to be a contract, so we're going to be dictating kind of what we expect out of the call for proposals. Sometimes it'll be more open because we kind of don't know what we can get, and other times it'll be a little bit more prescriptive. And I think you could see an SBIR opportunity in a topic where it is more about, what's out there, what kind of technology can we see that's built out of a small company that maybe we're not tracking. On other times, there may be a very, very, okay, we kind of know what's the art of the possible now. We know what we can buy. There's some companies there that are working in the space. So we feel like we can say, okay, this is a little more close to the parameters that we're going to ask for. So that all that is to say that, pay attention to what we're asking for in the proposals. And then also, we're going to ask for a DoD or a VA application or in terms of how we would apply it to use. So the more companies know about how that works and what our problems really are and how we're trying to solve them, even outside the proposal, can only help them. So with that, we have, like the NIH, we have our own internal research labs, and we have investors that are outside the SBIR process. So if you see the proposal and it's due tomorrow and you haven't thought about it before, that doesn't stop you from working all night and proposing. But a lot of the work has to be before the proposal comes in. And again, the phase ones can be still that first date. But frankly, almost every space we're calling for proposals and SBIRs, we're also investing our own grants and contracts in those directions. So even though if it looks like it's a new thing for the DoD, it would be shocking if we haven't already had some active investment. So we're using that to augment programs to bring in more industrial capabilities in small businesses, but also we may be interested in augmenting what we're currently doing. So some visibility on where things are, and then kind of the AFWorks model is let's start some directions and see who can partner up with. Sometimes in the DoD, it's the opposite. It's a program it's my responsibility to solve this problem. And it's really me that's going to pull that in and put it within the rest of my program. So you can really have both kinds of investment strategies, which probably is true on the outside as well. But so respond to the call as is, and then understand we're asking for help here. So it is a partnership between the DoD investor, so to speak, and the company. And then the final thing I'll harp on, because I don't want to miss this later, is you need to be a viable company because we need to be able to purchase this later. So if for you, the SBIR is a bit of a distraction on your business model, it's okay. You're diversifying maybe sometimes for a DoD application versus where you think you can make money in healthcare. Frankly, we can help you there, but we do need you to be the strongest business possible with that product. So I think that's an opportunity for you to kind of understand that if this is a 55th direction in your company that's 55 days old, that may not be the best business model for you. So be a little bit selfish in terms of your business viability, because we need that to happen as well as the product to be developed. So hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. So much information already that you've both shared with us on SBIRs. And now I'd like to hand it back to Tien as we continue to discuss the topic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. You guys have both been collectively involved in dozens, if not hundreds, directly of companies that have received SBIR funding. And I think as companies grow and develop their products, they want to get to the next level. So you've probably seen some of these companies, maybe a smaller percentage, actually get dilutive financing, angel investment, venture capital, and that kind of thing. So advice for some entrepreneurs that may have received SBIR financing, what would you say they need to consider when they go to the commercial market and try to get angel or institutional venture capital? Any thoughts there?
A lot. The first thing a SBIR company should do once you get your SBIR is announce it to the world. As a program officer, I literally had a conversation with a company saying, we don't need the money. We need your stamp of approval so that we can go out and raise investor funds, big money. I'm like, that's not a reason for you to invest in you. But that is truly what, to an investor, and you could tell me better if this is true or not, but that an investor looks for that seal of that agreement that this is an innovative technology and there's a business. So that's something. The other things to keep in mind are that some either agencies like the National Science Foundation want to see you become a viable company as well. So they will encourage you to seek outside funding. So for example, for a phase 2 awardee at the NSF, they can get another $500,000 in non-dilutive funding if they bring in $1 million of investment from the outside. So that is an even bigger reason to, again, pursue that kind of funding. If you're looking for outside investment, really leverage that SBIR. And it also gives you a little bit of a runway to be smarter about who you take your first investment from. Like if you're looking for outside investment, if we've gone to enough of these, you'll hear, don't take dumb money. You want smart money. You want partners who will not only invest in you, but also introduce you to clients, to customers, to help you grow your business, who maybe will help you as you're scaling, give you some, partial management help as you scale, because that's often very dangerous for companies. So that's the nice thing about the phase 2 to think about as an entrepreneur, is that it does give you both the credentials and a little bit of time to be more selective when you're looking for outside funding.
Oh, that's great, Diane.
Yeah.
Chris, what kind of considerations should entrepreneurs keep in mind when they're looking for capital? Are there any tips or tricks that you've seen work?
Well, certainly we do expect that there is a commercial market there. And if there's not, it's a difficult opportunity for us to use that mechanism. So the SBIR. So with that, again, first responder communities, outside healthcare communities, There's scenarios where just about everything we're doing has at least a notional application. I think sometimes that's an easier box to check than maybe it should be because, again, we need that market to be a viable one, not just a notional one. I think, those SBIRs I've seen as successful have follow-on funding. So that means as you start your investment strategy, your proposals, or even the DoD investment in phase one, it really is the beginning of the initiative, not the, hey, we got the grant or the contract, now we're good. No. That's when the work starts. So like a driver's license or a PhD or an MD, like, okay, now you can begin your role. And so that's where we do need some level of flexibility. And we may have an important need that changes because we learn more about the problem, or we learn more about the opportunity, or something else happens where there's additional issue happening. So I think with that is be that partner with the DoD and listen to kind of where we're trying to take things as they move forward, and realize that the long-term strategy, at least within the DoD, is going to be probably handed off to a program that has its own funding and own opportunity to make sure that product actually has somewhere to go. And then, for us, we're going to price that out across 20 years and what it looks like to procure it and then replace it. And so that's a whole acquisition process. And that doesn't really happen within the SBIR program. Those are things that the other parts of healthcare and the DoD is going to have to. So with that, your touch points with the DoD kind of just start at the SBIR phase once funded.
That was an amazing way to describe it. This truly is an entry point. Entrepreneurs are often very excited. I got my phase one. Okay, now they got phase two. Got the phase two. Okay, now we need $2 million to funding. Okay, got $2 million to funding. Now we need $5 million in revenue. Okay, now if we got another $20 million investment, then we can grow to be a $200, $300, $500 million company. And then they're running, 500 people across 3 continents, and it's just a continuation. And whether that's through the defense or, again, dual use technology, if the military needs it, more than likely the commercial market can use it as well. First responders is a great example if you're thinking about almost anything with a warfighter.
Yeah, and I like to tell teams, don't believe your own press releases. There's nothing wrong with the press release, but it only goes so far. And that's where, continuing to push and build and grow, from a fiscal perspective, that's the right answer, but that can't be the only answer. So, yeah.
Got it. Real quick question in terms of it's more of a general question, but are there any trends or emerging areas of focus within these SBIR programs that entrepreneurs should be aware of, particularly in healthcare and tech?
There's a lot of exciting investments happening right now with the government. 3 major initiatives that I'm aware of. One being the CHIPS Act, as a large 4-year focus on bringing semiconductor manufacturing, increasing it in the United States. Again, addressing the chip shortage. The SBA has a number of innovations money going into ecosystems, as well as the National Science Foundation recently launched their Regional Innovation Engines program, where taking the successful startup models from Silicon Valley or Boston with medical or New York with fintech, and making sure that regional innovation centers that have typically not gotten most of the funding from private capital are being able to leverage everything that they have, like us in the DMV, to take everything that we're really good at and accelerate it through a regional innovation engine. So there's a lot of ancillary funding coming in that area, and that will only add to and help out the understanding of the way to go after and invest in SBIRs for entrepreneurs.
Chris, how about in healthcare? Anything jump out at you in terms of emerging areas?
Yeah, I probably have 7 answers to that, and they're all in different directions. But I will tell you, if you look at the challenges that we're going to be faced with in the wrong conflict in the wrong area of the world, we do recognize, and outside the SBIR process, but including it, we do recognize that distributed manufacturing is a problem that we faced, that we recognized during COVID. So what is our way to produce medical devices, pharmaceuticals, et cetera? These are problems that we face. And one way to do that, as Diane kind of mentioned, is a regional focus of the ability to have products on demand produced, or really having a local manufacturing base. From a medical SBIR perspective, it might not necessarily be the flavor of the call, but having that as an injection into it, provides some stability in our, our infrastructure, so to speak, about biomedical investment strategies. Certainly in healthcare, anything that's happening out in town, we're trying to do the same, and we're trying to do it as cheap as possible. So Defense Health Agency, as an example, now responsible for the $57 million a year for medical care in the DoD. Anything that we can do to reduce costs there is going to be helpful. And then anything that's far forward usable that can combine capabilities. So if we have 12 devices now and we can make that in one, those are things that make us happy. And if it's lighter and can do other things, even better. So, again, from a general healthcare perspective, AI, analytics, precision medicine, definitely opportunities. Every specialty that exists on the outside also exists in the DoD at some level. So I don't have a great answer other than say we're interested in everything, and then be on the lookout for what the calls are. And then you may even be in a position where you just got some funding. So maybe you don't really need a small SBIR. But, your competitors are looking at that. So I think this is where, if you're not looking at it and we're asking for something that you already have, maybe we didn't know it, or, you may have an opportunity to kind of say, oh, we do have this now. And a small adaptation to operational conditions or first responders or something in between is something that, we need to see. And that's a way to show it to us with, maybe if you're lucky, with some funds.
We focus a lot on startups, and not as much on the small business. And I think Christopher brings up a great point. If you have a technically small company, 300 people, and you're developing innovations and you have a great idea for, or like you said, you see a call through the SBIR program for a very specific, whatever the DoD needs. If you want to invest a couple $1 billion in research, but you can't do it operationally because you're only 300 people or 100, whatever it is, this is, again, a really great program for you to take your expertise in-house. You are a successful company that maybe already is supplying the DoD with certain things. Anyway, there are a lot of small companies that do supply just general use products. But if you can do innovation as well, that would be even more attractive. And I think we often focus on this startup mentality, this 5 people, which is great. And a lot of those do get SBIRs. But the small business backbone of America, with a lot of these small, innovative, technically minded, hardworking companies, should really take a good look at this program, because it is basically a supplement, or actually creates your R&D department.
We really, for field applications, we want more products in hand when they're maybe not quite ready. And so it also allows for this iterative, let's put it in people's hands and see what they think about it. So that's probably not a healthcare, hospital setting as much as it is an operational use setting. But again, as you can iterate on the fly, so to speak, as you're maybe even 3D printing things that historically you would have to have a different mechanism for producing products. So.
One last question. Gonna make it kind of quick. Any thoughts or ideas on resources or networks in the Baltimore, Washington area to support entrepreneurs and investors that with their engagement with SBIR programs? Anything come to mind? Events, groups, organizations?
I already mentioned Startup Week, but before we leave, something that I think that investors miss out on is on the SBIR website, sbir.gov, you can actually search for the awards made. So you can search for your state, you can search for zip code, you can search for, if you're looking to invest only in medical devices for injectable, blah, 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 you can search by that, see who's gotten investment. And again, going back to the fact that these companies have gotten non-dilutive funding, so you might want to go talk to them. So that is a really great thing. So if you are an investor in the DMV, you can actually search for your area of focus and find the companies that have been invested in. Also, the SBA office is great. Every university typically has a tech transfer officer, somebody who will understand the SBIR process. And then each agency will often have their own webinars.
Yeah, I think at Fort Detrick, where the Defense Health Agency moves a lot of the funds out of an Army command for executing, especially SBIRs, but also other investments. They do have industry days where you can kind of come and understand and talk to people. And then I know the SBIR team there goes on the road to talk about opportunities and challenges and how they're structured. And frankly, they're on your side as well as ours. Yeah. So they're trying to help you the government is funny, right? So we're complicated. So we have to have better mechanisms to talk in your terms about what we want. And so there's groups out there to help you. So, again, internet can find all kinds of stuff, but, look specifically at the calls, and usually you can drill down to find a state, or even if there's a base, military base near you, there's usually outreach there that really does talk about small businesses and the SBIR process specifically.
Fantastic. Wow. You guys are a wealth of knowledge, and we really appreciate everything. Thank you so much. Let me turn it over to Anthony, who will close out the show.
Great. Thanks, Tien. And Chris and Diane, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your leadership and support of the startup ecosystem and helping companies. This is a really important area that many entrepreneurs don't know as much about. And so listening to today's show, you see how valuable this could be to founders. And we really appreciate you sharing your insights and experience with us today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. You guys are awesome.